back to my channel. I hope you are all having an amazing new year so far. For those of you that are in the new year here in Australia, by the time this video is up, I think it will be about 7 hours into the new year. So we're starting it off right with a Mystery Monday. I really want to get into uploading better this year. My uploading used to be so good. I would upload a video like every 2 to 3 days, but I have been slacking hardcore. I've just been so unmotivated. So 2018, uploads are going to be on point. We're also getting back into the mystery videos, if you couldn't already tell. So for today's video, we're going to be talking about a case that I have wanted to talk about for so long now. I actually started researching this case back when Mystery Mondays were like every single Monday, but I never uploaded it because I just never felt like I had enough information for a video. Like I never felt like I had the full story or knew enough about this person and this case. So finally, I feel like I have all of my ducks in a row and I'm ready to talk about it. So today's case is going to be on the disappearance slash murder death of Joshua MADDUX. Joshua MADDUX was born on the 9th of March in 1990 in Colorado Springs to Michael Albert and Roberta MADDUX. He was the fourth child born into his family, so he already had 3 older siblings. 2 of them were sisters, Catherine and Ruth, and one of them was an older brother named Zachary. So I read that Joshua was homeschooled for about 2 years before he started Woodland High School in Colorado Springs, which is where he lived his whole life. He was born there, grew up there, went to school there, and eventually disappeared there. And I couldn't tell specifically from the information if he was homeschooled for the first 2 years of high school or if he was homeschooled in primary school and then went to Woodland High School. But either way, he was homeschooled and then he went to Woodland High School. Everyone around Josh, his parents, his friends, the rest of his family, described him as this super bright kid. He was doing really well in school because he was like really smart. He was kind to everyone and he was musically gifted as well, so he played the guitar. In class, he would often like do silly things, like he would interrupt the presidential debates that they were having in class and would announce himself as candidate. One time he snuck into the school choir in just a robe while there was actually a performance going on. So he was kind of described as like this funny guy, like a guy with a good sense of humor that kind of was just well liked by everyone. His sister Ruth described him as being like everyone thought he was kind of an awesome kid. He was unique. He would bring like a briefcase to school instead of a backpack, and people really seemed to like that about him. Like I said before, he had this really awesome sense of humor, and he actually spent a lot of time developing these comic strips which he named Stickman and Smiley, and he would always share them with his friends and family and stuff. He was kind of known by his family as, I guess, a free spirit. I think this was kind of like later in life, and we'll get into why it was later in life, more towards his disappearance later. But he really liked to be outdoors. He loved to go on walks. He always talked about how he wanted to go on this big adventure one day, and he just didn't really want to communicate with anyone on this adventure, just kind of be like with nature. So as I mentioned, Josh had a brother named Zachary, and Josh and Zach were really close, and Josh kind of like looked up to Zach, but unfortunately in 2006 at the age of 18, Zach took his life, and this had like a huge effect on Josh. Even if he didn't show it, it like really deeply affected him. He was only 16 at the time, so his parents were really concerned. I think a few of his teachers were really concerned about him as well, and his sisters were concerned. So that death had a massive impact on him. So like I was saying before, when he became the free spirit towards the end of his life, that was actually after his brother took his own life. So he just wanted to be with nature a lot, and he just kind of became a lot quieter. Like people were checking up on him. And then 2 years later, on the 8th of May in 2008, Josh left his home and was never seen again. His father Mike said one day he got up and Josh was there, and then he just never came home. And the next day he still didn't come home, so Mike called all of Josh's friends, asked if they'd seen him. None of them had seen him. He asked if they knew where he was. but nobody knew where he was. So then on the 13th of May, 5 days later, he called the police. And honestly, like when I was first reading into the story, when I heard that he called 5 days later, I was like, that's crazy, that's such a delayed response. My parents would call like within an hour. But the way Mike described it and the way the rest of his family described it, it wasn't out of the ordinary for him to go on his walk, to go on walks. His sister Ruth actually said that they knew he was going to go on an adventure, like he had mentioned, but they just didn't think that it was so soon that it would happen. So it wasn't that far-fetched that he had left on his own, which is why there was such a delayed response until they called the police. His sister Kate actually said that he told her that he was going for a walk the day that he disappeared. And she also said that because he was 18, it was reasonable to assume that he had left of his own free will. So that's just kind of what she chose to believe that he did. And I'm sure that's what the rest of the family tried to tell themselves as well. So I mean, under the circumstances, I don't really blame them for taking a few days to call the police. It kind of makes sense to me. Nobody really knew if maybe his disappearance was connected to his brother's death. They thought that maybe it was all just too much for him and he just needed to get away and clear his head. And when I was reading about this, I actually read this quote from his dad, and it honestly just broke my heart. And basically his dad says that it's like tough. It's tough being a parent. You try and raise your kids right, and when they get 18, you think they're right, you think they're an adult, but they're not, and they still need a lot of help. And I don't know why, but just reading that, it just like actually broke my heart. So as I said, on the 13th of May, they called the police, and basically the police didn't do anything because he was 18, so he was free to leave of his own free will, and there was no reason to suspect a crime. So the police just basically said, there's nothing we can do. I think they filed him as a missing person, but they couldn't really search for him or put an investigation into it because, as I said, they didn't suspect a crime, and he was of legal age to leave. And so because of this, the family kind of searched by themselves. They looked for Josh for years and years, and his father Mike, even though him and Roberta divorced, he always stayed in the same house because he thought that if Josh was going to come back, that was going to be the one place that he would know, and so that was going to be the one place he would come back to, which seriously, like, I teared up researching this case. It is so sad hearing these things. So flash forward quite a few years, nothing happened. It wasn't until August of 2015 that the remains of a boy were found in an abandoned chimney just 2 blocks away from his dad's house. So they identified these remains as Joshua's by using dental records, and also the right top of his index finger had been taken off when he was a kid in a bicycle accident, I believe. So they used both of those to identify this as his body. Josh was this 6'2" guy. He was 150 pounds, so he was pretty skinny. And when they found him in this chimney, he was in the fetal position with his knees above his head. So this cabin had been abandoned for something like 10 years, since like 2005, and the owner, Chuck Murphy, said that his parents bought it like 60 odd years ago when it was a homestead, and it was known for illegal gambling and wild parties. Chuck also mentioned, and this is just like an offhanded comment, I guess, just like a bit of background information, but his brother lived there back when it was a rental property, but yeah, it hadn't been abandoned for the last 10 years. And this guy Chuck, he said that he would occasionally go and check on the house, but he also said that there was like a funny smell, but he didn't really think anything of it. He thought it was just like some dead rats or something underneath the house, and he never really thought to check inside the chimney because there was this old like massive bar that had been pulled off the wall and was like barricading the chimney. Basically, the only reason that Josh's body was found was because Chuck was redeveloping the area. So he was demolishing the cabin, and I think he was turning it into something like 32 single family homes. And the coroner didn't know what to rule his death, so he just ruled it as an accident. The coroner mentioned that it definitely wasn't an instant death, but they can only really speculate as to how he died. They said it definitely wasn't starvation, because that would take weeks and weeks and weeks. And they said that it was either dehydration or hypothermia, whichever just got to him first, basically. And the theory for his death, this is what the coroner and stuff theorized, was that he tried to break into the cabin by climbing into the chimney, but he got stuck because he didn't realize that there was a piece of furniture blocking the chimney. He couldn't get back out, and basically that is how he passed away. So this whole case, I guess at this point, seems pretty straightforward. It was an accidental death on his behalf. But this is where it gets so weird and so sketchy to me. And I just have to say, I do not think that his death was an accident. So the first thing is that the owner said that the chimney had rebar installed on top, which is basically like this metal mesh, which makes it really, really hard to get in to the cabin through the chimney. And it was kind of like to stop like animals getting in and stuff. But it also doesn't make sense, if this was there, how Joshua would have gotten inside the cabin. And also, what I find weird about this is the coroner said that the rebar was what stopped him from getting out, or what made him get stuck in the place. So it's like, how did he get in and then couldn't get back out because of this rebar? And this rebar, like literally the only reason that they found Josh is because they were demolishing this place, and this rebar had to be taken to the junkyard with all of the rest of the scrap metal. So it was like nearly impossible for him to get inside this way. Now, another weird fact that I read, but take this with a grain of salt because I only read it on 2 sources, so I'm not sure if this is completely legitimate claim, but apparently the owner said he does not remember putting the bar barricade there himself in front of the chimney. Now, the second thing, and I think this is the most sketchy part of the whole entire case to me, is when Josh was found, he was found completely naked except for a ribbed thermal shirt. So he didn't have underwear on, nothing, literally just a thermal shirt. And you'll never guess where the rest of his clothes were. They were inside the cabin. So how on earth were they in the cabin if he apparently climbed in through the top of the cabin but then couldn't get in the cabin? And if it was cold and he could have died from hypothermia, why would he take his clothes off? It doesn't make any sense. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, no, there's no way that this was an accident. Like, I don't understand what the coroner is thinking when he said it's an accident. Does he think that Josh broke into the cabin, moved the bar, climbed up the chimney, moved the bar back, took his clothes off, moved the bar, climbed up the chimney, somehow, oh my gosh, I'm dribbling, somehow moved the bar back to barricade himself in, and then just got in a fetal position and just waited there. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to mention, and this I read, it was a comment on a Reddit post. It was on an Ask Reddit, which was like, are there any serial killers that you guys know, and how did you feel when you found out that this person was a serial killer, basically? And there was an answer on there that was related to Josh. And as always, of course, take these comments with a grain of salt, because you don't know if someone is making this up or exaggerating or whatever the case may be. So definitely take it with a grain of salt. But this comment was so interesting to me, and it really, I feel like it is the most reasonable theory as to what happened to Josh. So basically, this commenter said he was good friends with Josh. And he also said that he went to school with this guy named Andy. So he wasn't really good friends with Andy or anything like that. He just kind of knew him from school, but he was good friends with Josh. And about a year after they graduated, Josh and Andy started hanging out. And when they started hanging out, Andy started telling people that him and Josh were planning a trip to New Mexico. So basically, like, Andy was telling everyone that Andy and Josh had been hanging out a lot. But as it turns out, Andy actually did end up going to New Mexico, and he was doing drugs with this guy who was a caretaker for someone who had a disability. So this guy who was a caretaker, he invited Andy back to his apartment with the person that he was looking after, and I don't know their names or anything. So basically, the caretaker went to go and have a shower, and he left Andy and the person he was looking after alone. And when he came back from the shower, Andy was gone, and the person that he was looking after had been stabbed to death. Andy was arrested for this, and when he was in custody, he actually told police that he killed this other woman in I'm not going to say the name because I know I'm going to say it wrong, but he killed this woman in a place, and then he stuffed it into a barrel. And this actually checked out. There was a woman in this place that police had found stuffed into a barrel, but he didn't end up getting charged for that because they already had someone else for that crime, and they just decided that the person they already had for that crime was a more likely suspect. So he basically got off for that. And I'm not sure what happened with the caretaker situation, if he did go to jail, or I read somewhere that he was in and out of mental institutions, but I'm not 100% sure. So flash forward a few years later, the caretaker was actually killed in a bar fight, and they suspected Andy for this. But all of the charges they had on Andy, they had to drop them all because there was just no evidence. Anyway, after all of this, moral of the story, after all of this, the guy who posted this comment and a bunch of Josh's friends called the authorities a bunch of times to basically like alert them of the situation, that the last time Josh was ever seen was with this guy who was like a known murderer, and that maybe they should look into it a little bit. The police just brushed it off, and they didn't even return the phone calls of the people who were trying to alert them of this possible suspect. And to make this entire thing worse, because I know it's already so frustrating, because if this comment is real, it's like, why did the police not even look into this as a possible lead? People had apparently called the police to let them know that this guy Andy was telling people that he put Josh in a hole, like quotations, put Josh in a hole. Honestly, I feel like this is such a mislead. Like I really feel like the police should have at least investigated this guy, or investigated Joshua's death a little bit more, because to me, there's no way it's an accident, and there's absolutely no way that this was a suicide. I feel like there had to be some sort of foul play involved. It's so clear to me, and they didn't even bother investigating it. They tore down the building and they cremated Josh's body. It's just, as soon as they ruled the death an accident, they just got rid of everything. I mean, firstly, the first indication this is some sort of like foul play involved or some sort of crime is that his clothes were inside and he was naked almost in the chimney, when apparently the reason he died in there is because he couldn't get in the cabin. Secondly, he couldn't enter the cabin because of the rebar, like he couldn't enter the chimney because of the rebar on top of the chimney, but he also couldn't have entered the chimney through the cabin because there was this massive bar there. There must have been some like correlation to somebody that something wasn't right. Now, something I did want to mention, but I didn't mention it before because I didn't want to like give it away. So the coroner was stated on this website saying that this definitely wasn't a natural death, and it definitely wasn't suicide. So that left three options. That left accidental death, homicide, or undetermined. So please tell me how, out of these three options, they chose to go for accident instead of further looking into homicide or saying undetermined. I don't see where the correlation was, where he was like, okay, we've got three options, We don't know what happened, so we're going to say it was an accident instead of saying it was undetermined. Oh, and another thing that I really should have mentioned earlier that kind of makes this whole Andy situation seem very legitimate is there are a whole bunch of reports, I'll put them on the screen, a bunch of mugshots, a bunch of arrest reports for this guy named Andy in New Mexico. Like, is that just a massive coincidence, or did this guy kill Joshua? And the fact that this is a legitimate guy and a legitimate story, and people were actually calling up the police and telling him, and this guy Andy has a criminal record, went to New Mexico, all of that stuff, I'm not sure why the police didn't take the lead more seriously or even look into it at all, even give it a second or the time of day. Okay, so that is everything. That is all of the information I have for you guys on this one. Definitely let me know what you think. If you have any other theories as to what could have happened to Joshua, I would love to hear them. I would love to hear your thoughts. And I would also love for you guys to let me know in the comments down below any other cases you would like me to cover next week. And yeah, hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye!